Hello, folks. My name is Shivaraja. I'm the Technical Solutions Architect for HYCU, and today I'll be demonstrating the HYCU data protection solution for our enterprise cloud. As you can see, this is our login screen. So let me just log in. So the moment I log into my HYCU data protection solution, I'll be presented with a dashboard which has several kinds of information. As you can see, you can actually take a look into your protected VMs versus unprotected VMs, protected applications versus unprotected applications, resource utilization of our HYCU data protections controller, where you can actually look into your compute memory and storage utilization, the overall backup job success versus failure rate, a detailed overview into your backup target capacity utilization, policy compliance, all that good stuff. But the first thing that I'd like to start with is the ease of deployment. You see, HYCU is basically delivered as a virtual appliance. So if you're running AHP on Nutanix platform or if you're running ESX, all you have to do is either deploy a QCOW image or deploy an OVF template and boom. It just takes a couple of minutes for you to deploy the entire solution. The only thing that you have to do manually is basically add the sources. Now, as you can see, this is my lab, and I've actually discovered all of my hypervisors within this one virtual appliance. I basically have my AHV cluster, I have my ESX cluster running on Nutanix, I also have my VMware cluster running on a non-Nutanix platform. All of these hypervisors discovered within this one instance of HYCU. In addition to that, I've also discovered a physical machine, and I've also discovered Nutanix files that is hosting all of my SMB and NFS shares. So the point that I'm trying to make here is A, our solution is extremely easy to deploy. B, our solution is extremely lightweight when it comes to its architecture. And C, we're still a scalable solution where we have the ability to discover your entire infrastructure within this one tiny virtual appliance. So once we have all of your sources discovered, you'll be able to look into all of your virtual machines. Now, we keep updating this list every 5 minutes, meaning that if you have any newly created virtual machines after the solution is deployed, we'd still be able to discover them. The cool thing about HYCU is it's not just about discovering the virtual machines, it's also about discovering the underlying applications. Now, in a traditional sense, when you're using any of our competitors as a backup solution, you would generally have to deploy agents and plugins to discover your applications like Microsoft SQL, Exchange, or Oracle. But with HYCU, all you have to do is just specify the credentials that have access to these applications and apply these credentials to a single or multiple VMs. And HYCU can start the automated discovery process, and we'll be able to discover your Microsoft SQL, your Oracle, SAP HANA, Exchange, and even your Active Directory environment. Now, all of this discovery and even the application consistent backups and restores or the granular restores, all of the capabilities that I'll be talking about in terms of our application support is performed in a purely agentless fashion. And that is the true value add of HYCU. Now, I can keep going on and on about talking about all these applications, about how we do backups and restores, but in the essence of time, let me just focus on one of the applications. And my favorite pick would be the Microsoft SQL. Now, when it comes to Microsoft SQL, one of the cool things about HYCU is we support all kinds of Microsoft SQL configuration. I mean, it's not just about standalone SQL instances, but also clustered SQL instances. We can support SQL availability groups, aka Microsoft SQL Always On. We also have the ability to support multiple SQL instances within the same virtual machine. So you name it, we have it when it comes to your Microsoft SQL environment. And the best part here is, unlike our competitors who make use of VSS backup methodology, HYCU basically makes use of a VDI-based backup methodology to protect your Microsoft SQL environment, which basically means it's not just about performing application consistent backups of your databases, but we also have the ability to protect your transaction logs, which basically enables us not just to restore your entire virtual machine, but also recover your individual databases to the exact point in time. So as you can see, I actually have the ability to select a user created database at the exact point in time. And I also have the ability to restore this database to an alternate SQL server if required. And that is the beauty of the solution. And when it comes to transaction logs, we also have additional configuration options, like if you wanted to simply turn off the transaction log generation and truncation, you can actually, turn this off, and HYCU won't back up those transaction logs. However, if you want to back up those transaction logs and ensure that these logs are created in a separate location, you can actually do that. But this basically ensures that, the log generation doesn't happen at the same location as your database location, so that your database directories doesn't run out of capacity. Now, in addition to that, what if you wanted to restore individual files or folders? Now, we were just talking about application backups. Now, let's just take this Microsoft SQL Server, for instance. Now, what if you wanted to do a simple file or folder level recovery? The answer is yes, you can actually do that. All you have to do is simply switch to the virtual machines view. And from here, all you have to do is search for that VM. This is the same Microsoft SQL VM. And from here, you actually have the ability to choose that same backup version. And when you click on Restore Files, this actually prompts a window that provides you the ability to perform individual file or a folder level recovery. And again, all of these granular recoveries that I'm talking about needs no agents or plugins. And that is the beauty of this solution. Every operation that I'm doing here is 100% agentless. So as you can see, this actually gives me the ability to do a file level or a folder level recovery. So I'm actually browsing through my file system here. So I can restore this entire folder if I wanted to. And when I choose next, here I have multiple options. I can actually do restores directly to my virtual machine, or I can do a restore to my individual file share, be it SMB or NFS, or I can even download this entire folder locally to my computer. Now, when it comes to restoring these files to the virtual machine, you actually have the ability to restore them to an original or to an alternate location. You also have the ability to, rename your existing or your restored files, and you also have the ability to restore the associated ACLs. So again, tons of options here. So in addition to your application level restore and file level restore, you also have the ability to restore your entire virtual machine. Now, I think this is a pretty no-brainer, right? I mean, VM level restore is one of the most basic, functionalities. But in addition to that, HYCU actually allows you the ability to clone your backups as well. And when it comes to cloning, you have multiple levels of cloning. For instance, if you wanted to do instant clones of your virtual machines, you can actually select Nutanix snapshot to do instant clones. And that is one of the biggest value adds because, again, most of the competitors out there only make use of the backup copies, but HYCU not only makes use of the backup copy, but also the local snapshots to do instant restores and instant clones. And I'll be talking more about that when we discuss about the backup policies. So as you can see here, you can actually do an instant clone of your virtual machine. And in addition to that, you can actually specify customized network adapter options, or you can actually, make use of, and in addition to that, you can actually ensure that whether this VM needs to be powered on when the clone operation is complete. Now, if you wanted to basically do a VM migrate, you can actually select a different cluster. And as you can see, this actually gives you the ability to perform, a cross-hypervisor cluster from point A to point B. And that is the beauty of the solution. So in this case, it basically becomes from a clone to a migrate operation. So again, you have tons of options here. So in addition to clone VM, you also have the ability to restore individual vDisks, or you also have the ability to clone those vDisks. And again, this is a very unique option from HYCU because when it comes to restoring snapshots directly from, let's say, your Prism interface on Nutanix, you only have the ability to restore an entire VM or basically doing file or folder level restore. But HYCU goes even beyond that. I mean, you have the ability to restore individual applications, as I talked before. You also have the ability to restore individual vDisks, right? Now, when it comes to cloning, you not only have the ability to just clone these vDisks, but you can also mount these vDisks to your local virtual machine. So let's say if you wanted to instantaneously clone a database, or if you just want to restore a table from a clone database, you can actually make use of this option, which could be completed within a matter of minutes, and you can instantaneously mount the most recently backed up database and retrieve, uh, the most recently deleted tables. So that's the biggest advantage here. So yeah, so those are the options. And in addition to that, you also have the ability to export your entire virtual machine, your vDisks, as as raw disk in a raw disk format. So you also have that option. All right. So till this point, we were just talking about, doing restores and also talking about doing live mounts using the clone option or clone vdisk option, and and we were talking about cloning VMs and migrating VMs to not just your local cluster but also to your remote cluster. But this is basically a place where I wanted to talk about the ability to spin up your VMs to a cloud infrastructure. This is a very cool feature. So let's say if you have like an Azure or a GCP account, what you can do is you can simply go to the cloud accounts section of HYCU, go ahead and add your service account within the HYCU user interface. And from here, you actually have the ability to move VMs to the cloud. So as you can see, this is one of our VMs that have been backed up to GCP. And this actually provides you the ability to spin up that VM to GCP, right? So let me just go ahead and make the appropriate selections. And once I've made all those selections, all I have to do is basically restore this VM. Now, this is the best part. Now, when you're basically spinning up this VM on the cloud, you have tons of options here. You can actually modify your compute, your memory, and you can also, based on the compute and memory selection, HYCU actually provides you the appropriate virtual machine type. And that is the best part here, because it's not just about moving a VM from point A to point B, but you also have a lot of customization options. And this just doesn't end there. You also have the ability to add additional network configurations. If you have any specific network configurations on your GCP environment, you actually have the ability to specify that. So that is the best part. And you can actually perform all of these functionality to Azure as well. So if you want to move these VMs to an Azure cloud environment, if you have a service account with Azure, you could do the same. Now, what if you wanted to bring these VMs back from the cloud? Let's say you've moved these VMs to the cloud infrastructure, and what if you wanted to bring them back? That's where you actually have the ability to spin those VMs back from your cloud onto your on-prem infrastructure. So in this case, I'm still going to use the GCP as an example. And as you can see, when it comes to recovering these VMs back to my on-prem infrastructure, I actually have the ability to select the appropriate cluster. And from here, I can also specify the appropriate compute, memory, and storage. I also have this option to specify, customized network adapter settings. And I also have this option to, turn this VM on when this VM is migrated, or basically, brought from the cloud to my on-prem infrastructure. So tons of options here. So in addition to that, HYCU also has the ability to back up volume groups. This is a very Nutanix-centric feature. And again, unlike our competitors who only support AHV, HYCU is one of those few solutions that also has the ability to protect your volume group. So if you have any clustered environments, we actually have the ability to discover the volume groups residing within these clusters, and we can actually protect them by making use of Nutanix snapshots. Now, speaking of Nutanix environment, we also have the ability to discover your Nutanix files, where we can discover all of your SMB and NFS shares hosted on your Nutanix files environment, and we can perform a seamless, snapshot-based backups. The reason why HYCU is very unique when it comes to performing the backup of your Nutanix files environment is because we make use of something called as the Nutanix's Change File Tracking API. And what this does is this basically helps you to perform extremely fast incremental backups. And it doesn't just end there, right? I mean, we have basically torture tested our solution to ensure that we have seamless backup experience on shares that has an extremely dense directory structure. I'm actually talking about millions of files and folders, and HYCU has the ability to back them up, you know, with zero performance problems. And when it comes to performing restores, we have tons of options here. You actually have the ability to restore your entire share, or you actually have the ability to restore individual files and folders, just like the way you would basically recover your files and folders from your VM-based backups. So again, that's something that you have with your existing HYCU infrastructure. Let's talk about HYCU's backup targets. Now, the one thing that I'd like to point out here is HYCU is 100% backup target agnostic solution. As you can see, we have several backup targets added within HYCU. Now, when you try to add a new backup target within HYCU, you'll notice that there's a lot of flexibility here. I mean, you actually have this ability to add any backup device that has the ability to host NAS protocols such as NFS, SMB. You also have the ability to add any device that can support HYCU. In addition to that, we have native Nutanix support as a secondary backup target where you can add Nutanix Mine that can host HYCU volume groups or Nutanix objects that can host S3 object storage. Now, in addition to that, we also have this ability to add cloud object storage as a backup target. We support AWS S3, we support Azure Blob, and we support Google Cloud Object Storage. And when it comes to performing backups to any of these cloud vendors, we are 100% cloud native. What I mean by that is you don't have to deploy any additional agents or plugins or data mover servers on your cloud vendor. Everything is like 100% agentless. The backups are pretty much seamless from your on-prem infrastructure to your cloud, where all you have to do is basically specify the appropriate credentials that are required for your cloud vendor to access that object storage, and that is pretty much about it. You should be able to do your regular incremental backups or your full backups or archive backups to the object storage. So you could basically treat this cloud object storage as your primary or as your secondary backup target. And that is another big value add from HYCU. Now it's time for us to discuss about how HYCU does its backups, right? So HYCU is purely a policy-based data protection solution. You basically define all of these rules and regulations on how your data is supposed to be protected. You define your SLAs through HYCU policies. Now, let's take a look at how you basically create a policy. Now, HYCU does have a lot of out-of-the-box backup policies, but for this demonstration, I'll just talk about how you go about creating a new backup policy. Now, here you have tons of options. Let me start with the basic options. First things first, you actually have the ability to specify the backup frequency. You also have the ability to specify the retention setting and also the RTO settings, which is very unique to the solution because we also keep track of your backup target's performance, and based on that, we can actually guarantee how fast it's going to take for you to restore an entire virtual machine. In addition to that, we also have this ability to specify a backup threshold that defines the interval or the size of your backup incremental backup chain, or you also have the ability to literally physically specify how long your backup incremental backup chain should look like. So again, a lot of flexibility here. And HYCU essentially has the ability to automatically select the backup targets based on the SLA that you've specified within the policy. However, if you'd like to enforce the backup target selection in a manual fashion, or if you'd like to, enforce the backup of a specific set of VMs to a specific set of backup targets, you do have the ability to do that as well. I mean, you can manually specify a single or a set of multiple backup targets, and the policy will enforce that any VM applied to this backup policy will only reside within the specified backup targets. So again, you have that option. Now, in addition to that, we have several options under the enabled options settings. The first setting that I'd like to talk about is the fast restore option. Now, as I mentioned before, this is very unique with our solution. The reason is because HYCU not only makes use of snapshots for backups, but we also make use of these snapshots for restores as well. And when it comes to restores, as I mentioned before, we can make use of these snapshots for restoring your applications, VMs, files and folders, vDisks, you name it, we have it. And the biggest advantage here is since we are making use of these snapshots, the recovery is going to be extremely fast. So that's a huge advantage here. The second part is the ability to copy your backups to a secondary backup target. So what the copy does is it basically copies the backups from your primary backup target to your secondary backup target. And we really don't, do anything on the source per se. I mean, any backup that has been taken on your primary backup target will be automatically moved to your secondary backup target without impacting the source. So the backups on your source will be done only once. The copies will be happening in the background. So your source or your production environment won't be disturbed for an additional backup copy when you enable this option. In addition to that, we also have something known as backup from replica. This is very specific to Nutanix, where we actually have the ability to specify a target Nutanix cluster where this Nutanix cluster has all of the replicated VMs. So HYCU actually has the ability to do backups from replicated VMs. One of the biggest use cases that we address using this feature is the ability to have multiple remote office branch offices trying to replicate their VMs to a centralized data center, and HYCU can basically make use of this replication to do efficient backups because you're not transferring the same data over a limited bandwidth twice. I mean, and we are basically making use of the replicated data over the wire, and we're basically doing a backup of that replicated data, and we're actually having a consolidated location for storing your backups and your replicated data. In addition to that, we also have archiving options. Now, archiving in HYCU is basically a child policy. So as you can see, when you choose the archiving option here, you can specify the existing archiving policies. Now, if you want to create your own policy, all you would have to do is go to the archiving option and click on new. And this is the place where you can specify your weekly, monthly, or yearly archives. And based on your selection, you also have the ability to specify the appropriate backup targets that can store your archive backups. And once you create this archive backup policy, you can specify that as a child policy within your parent backup policy. And in addition to that, you also have the ability to specify backup windows. And again, you have tons of options here. You can actually specify when your backups should happen and what type of backups should happen. I mean, should you just do incrementals during the weekdays? And if you wanted to do full backups only during the weekends, I mean, you have the ability to do that as well. I've seen a lot of customers who'd like to ensure that their backups don't interfere with their production environment during the weekdays because that's the most busiest time. So I've seen customers doing incremental backups during off production hours and doing full backups during the weekends when there's barely any load on the production environment. So that is a pretty good strategy, and HYCU can enable you to do that. So till this point, we just discussed about the main features of HYCU. I think it's time for us to talk about some of the ancillary features of HYCU. Let me start with self-service. Now, self-service is basically a place where we discuss about the user management. And the first thing that I'd like to point out is HYCU has the ability to integrate with your Active Directory service or your LDAP service. So based on the directory services, you actually have the ability to add not just one, you can integrate with multiple AD domains, and HYCU has the ability to, use your AD users and AD groups to log into HYCU. So once you've specified the appropriate AD domain, you actually can specify the users under the user section. And once you have added those users, you also have the ability to specify the appropriate roles. So for instance, when a user is created or added within HYCU, you can actually assign them roles as a viewer who only has read-write privilege, who only has read-only privileges. You can also make that user as a backup or a restore operator who only has backup and restore or only restore privileges, or you can actually add that assign administrator privilege where the user not only has backup and restore but can also manage the entire infrastructure to his authorized resources. Now, once you assign these roles, HYCU also has the ability to assign ownership. So for instance, let's say you wanted to have a group known as DevOps that actually has the ability to manage their own set of VMs for backups, restores, and cloning. What you can do is you can actually create a dedicated group, and you can just assign, the VMs that they're authorized to view and manage. And you can also assign users with the appropriate roles and permissions. So when a user, let's say a user with an administrative privilege for his DevOps group logs into HYCU, and he or she will only be able to view the resources that they're authorized to view. So starting with dashboard, when you take a look at the dashboard view in itself is totally filtered to view just the resources that apply to DevOps group. Let me just switch this back. Now, if you view the infrastructure group, you actually have an even bigger view. But when a user from a DevOps group logs in, he or she will only be able to view a dashboard that is totally filtered to view their appropriate set of resources. And when they click on virtual machines, if you remember, we were able to see hundreds of virtual machines, but in this case, he or she will only be able to view the virtual machines that they're authorized to work on. And based on the role-based access control that I was talking about, they'll only be able to do backups or restores or even have administrative privileges. And this can be applied on VMs, on applications, and even on shares, right? So if you have a bunch of SMB NFS shares and you want to delegate those shares to the appropriate owners, you could actually do that with HYCU, where they can do their own backups and their own restores. And that is the big advantage here. So basically, HYCU helps you to host a sandbox style environment in a shared infrastructure. In addition to that, HYCU also has reporting infrastructure. We are one of the few solutions where we offer a full-blown reporting infrastructure at no additional cost. All of these features that I'm talking about is actually inclusive of the base license. So to start with, one of my favorite backup reports is the VM backup status report that is actually available out of the box. So when you view this report, you can actually view all of the VMs that have been backed up over the last 24 hours. What's the status of the backup? What's the backup type? Are they incremental or full backups? What's the backup duration? The amount of time it took for the backup job to complete? The amount of data that was transferred? What's the backup start time and end time? All those good details which can be generated over a period of time. And you actually have the ability to export this report into a PDF, PNG, or a CSV format, or you also have the ability to schedule these report to be generated on a periodic basis. And in addition to that, you also have the ability to email these reports in the same mentioned format. So again, tons of options. The last thing that I wanted to talk about the reports is the ability to create your own customized reports. Now, if you feel like the out-of-the-box reports are not helpful, you still have the option to create your own custom reports. Again, when it comes to report customization, you have tons of options here. As you can see, when it comes to the report type, as you can see, there are a lot of options. You can have bar charts, stacked bar charts, line charts, or a typical heat map. So let me just try to create a very basic report. I'm just going to go with the stacked bar chart, and let me just and As you can see, I've just created a quick custom report on backup target utilization based on source clusters. So I can simply save this report. And there you go. I can preview this report. I can even export this report if I wanted to. So that's how easy it is to use. And as I mentioned before, again, this entire reporting infrastructure is totally inclusive of your base license. In addition to that, we also have access to events. So HYCU keeps track of all activities, be it with regards to successful backups or restores or any internal operations like backup expiration or user related activities. And you can actually create email notifications for all of these events or for a subset of events. Now, most of the times our customers are just worried about backups and restores. So they just want to be alerted on backup or restore failures. So what they can do is they could simply select backup, and they could select restore, and they could simply specify warning and failed, and that's pretty much about it. They'll only be alerted on any type of backup or restore related failures. Now, the cool thing here is all the reports and the events can also be filtered based on the self-service. Again, in this whole multi-tenancy discussion, if your end user only has access to a specific set of specific set of resources, their reports and events will be filtered down to the resources that they're authorized to view. So everything, the entire solution in itself can actually honor your multi-tenancy capability. And last but not least, the jobs. I mean, we keep track of all of your backup and restore jobs. Now, one of my favorite examples is to showcase, one of our application backups. Now, I'm just going to take one of our Exchange servers that get backed up by HYCU. Now, when you look into that job details, you basically have a pretty detailed overview of what's happening when you do a full or an incremental backup. Now, if these details are not enough for you, you can actually view a portion of the job log within the web UI, which actually shows the ETA of when the backup is going to be completed, what's the throughput, what's the amount of data that would be backed up, what's the backup target's capacity utilization, what's the expected performance, and it also confirms if the backups are application consistent or crash consistent. And as you can see, we were able to create an application consistent snapshot, meaning that these backups are compliant. So yeah, as I mentioned before, this solution is extremely easy to deploy. This solution occupies an extremely tiny footprint. And above everything else, this solution is extremely easy to use. You really don't have to be a rocket scientist to use this solution. If you've been using VMware or if you are Nutanix, if you're basically a virtualization admin, using this solution would be a walk in the park because the entire user interface, as you can see, is designed for virtualization admins. If you'd like to know more information about HYCU, please reach out to us at info@hycu.com. Thank you.